have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Gulf Today on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines coming out of West Asia this hour. A US official says President Trump's letter asking Israel's president to pardon Benjamin Netanyahu is not part of any broader deal on the Gaza ceasefire or the Abraham Accords. The official dismisses speculation that the request was tied to pressure on Netanyahu to make Palestinian-related concessions. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington is making good progress on a UN resolution to create an international stabilization force for Gaza, but notes the unit shouldn't be a fighting force. He also warns that rising settler violence in the West Bank could threaten ceasefire efforts. US intelligence reviewed reports that Israeli officials discussed sending Palestinians into possibly rigged Gaza tunnels, according to former officials briefed on the matter. The information was shared with the Biden White House amid concerns about US complicity if such tactics were found to violate war crime standards. A Palestinian man is shot in the foot during a settler assault on the West Bank village of Sinjil, with local officials reporting minor injuries. The village says settlers fired live rounds at civilian guards, calling the incident part of a sharp rise in violence. Israeli President Isaac Herzog and top military officials condemn shocking and serious attacks by Jewish settlers on Palestinians in the West Bank. Herzog urges an end to the growing wave of violence, adding a rare, forceful voice to otherwise muted official criticism. The IAEA says it has lost track of Iran's near-weapons-grade uranium after US and Israeli strikes damaged key sites, leaving 5 months of material unchecked. The watchdog says verification is overdue and Iran must file a special report on the location and status of its enriched uranium. A deputy commissioner under investigation for breach of trust is released after 7 hours of questioning with his identity under gag order. He is temporarily barred from police facilities and contacting those involved as Internal Affairs continues its inquiry. Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran could run out of water if rains don't arrive by December, forcing strict rationing. He warns that a continued drought may even require evacuating the capital's 10 million residents. Now, top story of the hour. Iraq's parliamentary election has delivered a leading position for the coalition of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, who is seeking a second term, according to 2 electoral officials speaking to Reuters. While Sudani positioned himself as a reformer capable of stabilizing Iraq after years of instability, many young and disillusioned voters saw the election as a contest between established parties seeking to divide the country's oil wealth. No single party won enough seats to form a government outright in Iraq's 329-member legislature, meaning the process of building alliances with other political groups will now begin, a process that can take months and is often fraught with negotiation and compromise. The Electoral Commission also reported a turnout of just over 56%, reflecting both engagement and voter skepticism. Sudani's coalition now faces the challenge of navigating Iraq's complex political landscape and forming a functional government, all while addressing the expectations of citizens who are calling for meaningful change after years of turmoil. Okay, now joining us to discuss this is Peter Baum. He's the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz. He joins us live from London. Peter, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Of course, Iraq's elections remain contentious. Sudani reporting victory. What are your thoughts ahead for the hopes of a future coalition forming within Iraq?
Yeah, good morning, Thomas, and once again, a pleasure to be with you again.
Mm.
As you quite rightly said, the turnout was just 56%, very, very low turnout, and that was really because of the Shia bloc and the followers of Muqtada al-Sadr boycotting the election. So we're left with a government that hasn't won a majority sufficient enough to govern alone and has to start negotiating with other political parties. Now, there were some other very strange results in this election of those 56% that did vote. It was noticeable that the Kurdish parties did very well in certain provinces where they previously had little recognition, certainly in the Sunni provinces. But where there were large Kurdish minorities, they failed abysmally. They, in some provinces, first time since 2005 that they haven't been represented. So one can only gauge from that that perhaps there's been a population shift from the Kurdish minority within Iraq. Now, the negotiations, therefore, looks as if it will be the Sudanese current bloc, and he will have to negotiate with the Kurdish parties, which I'm sure will come on board. But also, that in itself will not be sufficient. The losers in this election have to be the Iranians, because they will not be represented as strongly as they previously were. I mean, Iran as a country, those parties supporting Iran, and also Soudani has made clear that he's trying to isolate himself from Iran, whereas before he was quite tolerant of the Iranians. He's promoting himself as a reformist, someone who can reconstruct Iraq and move forward, a pragmatist. That will come as a blow to the already isolated Iranians. But as you quite rightly say, negotiations with other parties will certainly take weeks, if not months. So we're yet to see what the final makeup of the Iraqi parliament will be, but we should know that realistically just by the end of this year. I would suggest within another 6 to 8 weeks.
Yes, and Peter, what more can you tell us about Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani? Of course, he took office in 2022 and is now set to be Prime Minister of Iraq once again. What more can you tell us about his policies and, of course, the challenges that he faces going forward in Iraq?
Well, the challenges are huge because I cannot believe that the Shia bloc under Muqtada al-Sadr is going to lay back and just be content with this election result. So the first challenge is going to be a domestic one, and what the reaction will be from, let's say, the more militant Shia parties and those parties more aligned with Iran. That will be the first hurdle. The second thing is how successful Soudani can be in removing himself from the hold that Iran has over Iraq, and it's a huge hold. Let's face it. There are Iraqi militias dedicated more to Iran than they are to Iraq, operating within Iraq. So that's going to be a huge problem as well. But if he can navigate those paths, if he can get a coalition strong enough to support his reformist policies, then there is a possibility. But for the life of me, Thomas, I cannot see how the Shia bloc is just going to take this lying down. I think he has some serious issues to navigate around, and we don't know whether he's going to be successful in being able to do that. It will be interesting to see what the reaction is of the Trump administration and how supportive they will be of Soudani, because clearly they're encouraged by the fact that given the statements that he's made during the election campaign, he wishes to cut off the strong ties that Iran has over Iraq. So this is going to be a very difficult path for a new Iraqi government to form.
Okay, Peter, do stay with us as we have further updates coming out of West Asia. Now, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that Washington is optimistic about the chances of establishing the International Stabilization Force in Gaza and is working on advancing a new draft through the UN Security Council to create the unit. According to reports, the US is looking to bring the resolution creating the international mandate for establishing the ISF to a vote in the coming days so that the force can be deployed by the beginning of 2026. As per the draft resolution, the force will be responsible for stabilizing the security environment in Gaza by ensuring the process of demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, including the destruction and prevention of rebuilding the military, terror and offensive infrastructure, as well as the permanent decommissioning of weapons from non-state armed groups. Meanwhile, Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand has said that the G7 called for the security of Ukraine and the unimpeded flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza in a joint statement during the closing of the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting in Canada. Let's take a listen in to Anita Anand.
First, we reaffirmed our commitment to Ukraine's long-term prosperity, security, and defense. Canada has made it a priority of our G7 presidency to maintain and strengthen our support for Ukraine at every opportunity. We also turned our attention to the Middle East, to the urgent need for a path toward peace and lasting stability. We reiterated our support for the U.S. Comprehensive Peace Plan to end the Gaza conflict. And we continue to call for the unimpeded flow of humanitarian.
Peter, of course, there's a lot of speculation in who is going to be in this international stabilization force that's put into the Gaza Strip in order to maintain security in the region as we move from the first into the second phase. What are the key challenges in choosing said stabilization force?
Yeah, they are enormous. For Israel, there are certain red lines that she will not tolerate. The first one is the presence, excuse me, Thomas, the presence of a Turkish force. Now, Erdogan clearly feels emboldened domestically. He has his opposition has been diluted because of the force with which he's undertaken to suppress the opposition. He's emboldened because of his support for the new Syrian regime, which has just recently met in Washington, and by all accounts, the meeting went very, very well. So he feels that he has to further enhance his credibility within the Muslim world, and Turkey will definitely want some presence in Gaza, which Israel is dead against. Now, that will be the key issue. There are other Muslim countries that have suggested they would be providing a force in Gaza if called upon, such as Indonesia, Malaysia perhaps, and Israel would be quite content with that, but certainly not a Turkish presence, and that has to be navigated. And there's one other thing that the Israelis are very unhappy about, Thomas, if I may say, it's related to this topic, and that is the original Trump proposal, the 21-point proposal, suggested that there would be no room for those organisations, those NGOs, formally responsible for overseeing aid into Gaza. The main one being UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Refugee Works Agency, because of the way the Israelis felt were connected to Hamas. It now seems, because there's been a change in the wording, that UNRWA will indeed have a role, and that has really upset the Netanyahu cabinet. Now, the quid pro quo of that may just be that, okay, we're prepared to let UNRWA continue in a role of providing aid on the basis that perhaps no Turkish troops are in Gaza. That could be the negotiation process that's going on at the moment, but we'll have to wait and see. But in terms of the makeup of the force, Israel will certainly not want Irish troops there because of the experience they've had with the Irish troops in Lebanon. They probably don't want Spanish troops there because of the anti-Israeli Spanish government. But other than that, Turkish troops would be the main barrier, but other than those three, I think Israel would be quite happy to see Muslim countries dedicate forces to the peacekeeping and reconstruction process in Gaza.
Now, Peter, of course, Turkey and of course their President Tayyip Erdogan have a great relationship with the Trump administration. Does Israel have the leverage to prevent that from happening?
Probably not. And I think Turkey will be quite forceful in demanding that they have some kind of presence there. And there could be a compromise in suggesting, well, okay, we won't have Turkish armed military force there, but in the presence of an unarmed peacekeeping force or a police force, something like that, some kind of security presence, that could be a compromise. But you're quite right. Erdogan and Trump have a very, very strong relationship. Trump's very pleased about the way the Syrian issue has come to fruition, and that's where Erdogan's leverage is. But Israel, of course, will have to make some kind of compromises, albeit having some kind of Turkish presence there. But an armed Turkish presence, I think she will fight against.
Yes, Peter, do stay with us as we have further information coming out of Israel, where it has been questioned at the United Nations over multiple reports of alleging the torture of Palestinian detainees, in particular since the Hamas invasion of October the 7th of 2023. The Committee of the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment by Member Countries. Rapporteur Peter Vidal-Kessing of the UN Committee Against Torture says Israeli forces have sharply escalated torture since October the 7th, including severe beatings, electric shocks, waterboarding and threats of rape. Acts, he said, are carried out with mere total impunity. Let's listen in to what Peter Vidal had to say.
However, the committee has been deeply appalled by the description we have received in a large number of alternative reports of what appears to be systematic and widespread torture and ill treatment of Palestinians, including children and vulnerable groups. The reports we have received come from many different sources, from international bodies, including various UN bodies, from NGOs in Israel, from NGOs in Palestine, and from international NGOs and other sources. All these reports provide detailed and very identical descriptions of torture and ill treatment inflicted on Palestinian detainees. They also highlight that torture and ill treatment has escalated sharply since 7th of October 2023, reaching unprecedented levels and carried out with near total impunity. Many of those detained and subsequently released have reportedly been subject to torture and other ill treatment. Severe beatings, including on the genitals, electric shocks, being forced to remain in stressed positions in prolonged periods, deliberate inhuman conditions and starvation, waterboarding, and widespread sexual insults and threats of rape. The fact that one of the parties to the armed conflict violates and disregards obligation under these rules cannot be used as an excuse for the other party to the armed conflict to violate and disregard their obligations under international.
Peter Baum joins us once again. Peter, of course, this comes from a long list of people and organisations who accuse Israel of mistreating Palestinian detainees. Of course, Israel currently faces a huge scandal of the T-Men prison, but of course this goes different. This UN body has said that these acts were carried out with mere total impunity. Is this legitimate scrutiny for against those Palestinian detainees?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, Israel is a functioning democracy, and if acts such as these are proven, then it would be hoped that Israel will go through the due legal process, as she has done before, where acts of violence against prisoners have been taken to court and the perpetrators jailed. So contend with, and we know how from cradle to grave trials such as this, if it does come to trial, can take an age. She will be more aware of the demonisation of Israel in the propaganda war more than anything else. So it would be hoped that at some stage an Israeli government will look into all these acts, take them on board, and bring any perpetrators through their criminal justice system. What we also know is, Thomas, that the UN will will give every opportunity to keep this in the public domain, because the UN's spots haven't changed. She will still want to demonise Israel and keep this at the forefront.
Yes, Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. It's always a pleasure to have you on. We now stay in the region, and Turkey's main opposition party has strongly condemned the indictment against jailed Istanbul mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, calling it a bill of slander and completely empty. Speaking at his party's weekly rally in Istanbul, CHP leader emphasised that the trial should be broadcast live so that the public can see what he described as a political hoax. The legal case has drawn global attention after a prosecutor demanded a staggering prison sentence of more than 2,000 years for İmamoğlu, alleging he led a widespread corruption network that cost the state billions of lira. The indictment names 402 suspects in total, accusing them of forming a criminal organisation, bribery, fraud and bill rigging. CHP officials claim the case is politically motivated, designed to obstruct Mayor İmamoğlu and weaken the Republican People's Party ahead of future elections. İmamoğlu has consistently denied all allegations, calling the charges baseless. The situation has escalated tensions between Turkey's ruling AK party and, of course, the opposition, and it remains a major story to which the trial progresses. Let's listen in to Özgür Özel, the CHP leader.
Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi'nden bir tek onlardan ses çıkmıyor. Çünkü onlar yaptıkları kumpası biliyorlar. Çünkü onlar bu davanın hukuki değil siyasi olduğunu, Ekrem Başkan'ın önünü kesmek için olduğunu, Cumhuriyet Halk Partisi'ni iktidardan uzaklaştırmak için olduğunu biliyorlar. Değilse Sayın Erdoğan, Hodri Meydan, canlı yayın istiyorum.
We're now joined by Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar. He is a senior strategic and international affairs expert, and he joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Dr. Kochar, for joining us here on NewsX World. Critics of President Erdogan say that Turkey is sliding into a dictatorship. Is this case an example of that?
Thank you, Thomas. I think more or less, if you look at the politics which Erdogan has been playing in Turkey over a period of time, he totally decimates his opposition. He doesn't want any resistance to his orders, and we saw it in the last elections also. He faced a problem, and he has got more of an authoritarian kind of attitude in running his country. And therefore, I think this serious charge which is being levied by the Republican People Party as a slander campaign against their leader Imamoglu is politically correct, I should say that, because you must remember that next elections in Turkey are slated for 2028. And there is already a lot of opposition to the economic policies of Erdogan, as well as domestic affairs, the way he is running his own country. There is a price rise, commodities are on the increase, cost of living actually gone up, and
Yes.
a high inflation is there in Turkey. If you can have a look at the figures,
Yes.
depreciation of the currency has taken place, and social discontent is there in Turkey. So if we look at all these factors, they would result in a very tough time for Erdogan in 2028 elections. So he doesn't want
Yes.
to compound it. He doesn't want to compound his problems along with a leader of the stature of this gentleman. So I think this is more a slander campaign, and it's a victimization,
Okay.
and it's a way of removing a strong opposition leader who can threaten his presidency in times to come for the next general elections, which are going to be held in Turkey in
Yes.
2008.
Yes, Major General Dr. Rajan Kochar, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Always a pleasure to get your input. We stay in Turkey, and the Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with Rustam Umerov, head of Ukraine's delegation for talks with Russia in Ankara on Wednesday. The meeting comes as Ukraine pushes to unblock the process of prisoner swaps with Moscow, a process that has faced delays in recent months. Umerov, who also serves as Secretary of Ukraine Security Council, said on social media that there was already an agreement in place regarding the prisoner exchanges and that it must be implemented. He emphasized that Ukraine is actively seeking solutions and will continue discussions in the Middle East to advance the process. Meanwhile, Russian state media reports that Moscow is ready to resume peace negotiations with Ukraine in Istanbul, saying the Russian side is prepared and that the ball is in the Ukrainian court. This development raises hopes for renewed dialogue, though challenges remain given the ongoing conflict. The Ankara meeting highlights Turkey's continued role as a diplomatic intermediary in the region, facilitating communication between Kiev and Moscow at a time when both sides are under pressure to find a path forward towards resolution. We will continue to follow this story as talks progress and bring updates on any agreements or further meetings in the coming days. Now, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says boycott politics doesn't work as he hits back at US President Donald Trump's decision to skip the G20 Leaders Summit in Johannesburg later this month. Trump has said that no official US diplomat would attend the gathering over widely discredited claims that white people are being persecuted in South Africa. Speaking outside Parliament, Ramaphosa said the US's absence is their loss and that the boycott would not prevent the meeting from going ahead. Let's take a listen in to the South African president.
It is unfortunate that the United States decided not to attend G20. All I can say in my experience in politics is that boycotts never really work. That the United States has an important role to play, so therefore he must come to the G20. Now, they've chosen to boycott, and boycotting never achieves anything of great impact, because I would say that the United States needs to think again whether boycott politics actually works, because in my experience it doesn't work. It's better to be inside the tent.
And that's a wrap on Gulf Today. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
Thank you.